What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? It's Drew here and welcome back to FudgeMuppet. Today I not only have a brand new Fallout 4 build for you guys, but this is also the most challenging build we've come up with. This build is not easy to play, but if you can pull it off, it's immensely rewarding. This build is a true glass cannon, dishing out a ton of damage in exchange for very little defensively. We've gone all out on having the best defense physically possible, and you'll know what we mean when you start taking down huge high-level enemies with one fatal strike. This is the Stalker. The Stalker earned her name by being as silent as the grave when pursuing her enemies. Dressed like a hunter, wielding nothing but a lightweight razor-sharp knife, the Stalker moves silently into position, before using blitz, pouncing with impossible speed, and delivering one instant critical killing blow, beefed up with sneak and crit multipliers. Her deadly efficiency in combat translates into her dealings with the other inhabitants of the Commonwealth. She's a good person, but she takes no crap from anyone, staring down those who oppose her and destroying anyone who crosses her. Before we jump into the build, don't forget that timestamps can be found in the description to help you navigate the video. But with that said, let's kick things off with the Stalker's backstory and basic values. The Stalker was born in Hudson Valley, New York, and lived with her parents in a quiet town near the Hudson River. Her mother worked in town in a department store, while her father was a retired army veteran who spent his spare time hunting in the surrounding wilderness. The Stalker spent most of her time around her father, while her mother was off working, and she grew to idolize him. When she was old enough to tackle the responsibility, her father showed her his study, which was decorated with rows of medals and badges. On the walls were mounted rifles, and in cases below them, there were various small arms and combat knives. To the young Stalker, this was the coolest thing imaginable, and every weekend when her father would come home with an animal slung over his shoulder, her mouth would water at the prospect of their Sunday dinner. The Stalker loved her mother, but the few times she'd visited her at work, she'd been bored stiff. When she wasn't putting clothes back on racks, she was being rudely addressed by unfriendly customers with a shockingly poor grasp of manners and etiquette. The Stalker would take her father's lifestyle over her mother's any day. On her 14th birthday, her father, despite the visible look of disapproval on her mother's face, presented her with her very own pocket knife. It was a small thing, but she cherished it. The blade had a small indent in the side so it could be folded inside the grip when not in use, but she rarely utilized that feature. Her father made sure to meticulously teach her how to properly and safely use it, and the Stalker listened attentively. She was excited and eager to use the thing, but she saw the value in learning how best to avoid losing a finger. For the rest of the day, the Stalker was admiring her knife, trying to find excuses to use it, maybe a parcel to open or some twine needed cutting. By the time she was 15, the pocket knife had been nicked and scratched in 1,000 places, and the Stalker was so skilled with it in her grasp that she would show off to her school friends by playing the knife game, striking the table in the gaps between her fingers at speeds that their eyes could barely follow. Not only did this handy trick impress her peers, but the Stalker had a feeling that it played a role in why she'd never once been bullied in her schooling life. Sometimes, when her father was out, she would sneak into his study, fiddling with the lock of the cabinets, and then taking out one of his many knives. Some were simple and deadly sharp, while others were larger and ornate like ceremonial daggers. Each blade in the collection was amazing in its own right. At 16, her father took her out on her first hunt. She didn't take to firearms quite as well as she did to knives, but her father had been impressed by her ability to move quietly and stay undetected by the wildlife. She would help him spot the game, giving him readings from the compass, and then, after his precise and lethal shot, they would assess the kill and carry it home. Her father taught her to use her knife to skin the animals, putting every part of the catch to use. Much like every other activity with a blade in hand, she took to it quickly. As her schooling life came to an end, the Stalker dreamed of following in her father's footsteps, joining the military and serving on the battlefield. But she knew that as a woman she wouldn't be able to fight. Any other role would likely bore her, so the Stalker reluctantly stuck to her studies. She did prefer physical endeavors, but she was by no means incompetent academically. She enjoyed history and law, especially criminal law, so she took this passion into her tertiary education, moving towards the coast of Long Island to study law at the Suffolk County School of Law. Her time studying was largely uneventful until her final year. One day, as she was taking a shortcut through an alleyway to her student residence, she could hear footsteps behind her. They were loud, clumsy steps. Whoever was following her was fueled by adrenaline and was doing a poor job of containing it. She turned and was confronted by a man with a knife and a balaclava covering his mouth and nose. The knife was filthy and covered in rust. Any man who took such poor care of his weapon was doubtless equally poor at wielding it. The Stalker didn't didn't bother to raise her hands in fearful surrender. She stared at the man, holding eye contact. He moved the knife closer to her in an attempt to intimidate her, and his voice grew more aggressive, but also more panicked as he ordered her to raise her hands. The stalker diverted her gaze to the knife, waiting for it to come just a few inches closer. And when it did, the stalker thrust out her left hand, clutched the man by the wrist and twisted, wrenching the knife free and sending it tumbling to the ground. As she did this, her right hand reached under her coat and into her belt, and by the time the criminal had a chance to exclaim from the pain in his wrist, he could feel cold steel pressing against his neck. The stalker informed him, in a calm and measured tone, that were she to make the slightest cut into his neck at the exact position it was currently held, nothing in the world would stop him from bleeding out within a matter of minutes. The thief was shaking uncontrollably now, and the stalker noticed a puddle forming by the coward's feet. She released her grip on his wrist, and he ran faster than she'd ever seen anyone run in her life. The stalker wiped the man's sweat from her knife and replaced it in her belt. She straightened her coat and continued walking home. When she completed her degree, she returned home to Hudson Valley. Her parents welcomed her with open arms, and she went with her father on a celebratory hunt. The following week, her father had a big veterans event taking place in Boston, and she invited the stalker to join him. She had a wonderful time meeting many grizzled soldiers with fascinating stories to tell. And while she was there, she caught the attention of a young veteran, a man named Nate, who came to introduce himself to her. After many pleasantries, stories, and even a round of the knife game, the two hit it off, eventually marrying and settling down to raise a family in Sanctuary Hills. 200 years after the Great War, when the stalker awakens from cryosleep, she will want nothing more than to see her husband's killer's head rolling around on the floor. She envisions cutting the thing off herself, savoring every moment of his pain. But after the initial anger subsides and she accepts the reality of her situation, she regains control of her emotions and instead chooses a practical plan. She'll follow what clues she can in the Commonwealth to find Sean, and if she's lucky enough to come face to face with a coward who came to them in the vault, she'll show him how that encounter would have gone down had she not been frozen solid in a pod. She will be very strong-willed and incredibly difficult to intimidate in her dealings with others, but fundamentally, she's a good person and will be morally pure. But when people don't treat her with the same courtesy, she won't take any crap and will teach them to respect her one way or another. With these attitudes, the stalker is suited to either the Railroad or the Minutemen. Her skill set would make her a perfect agent for the Railroad, as her stealth and skill for silently killing would make the extraction and liberation of synths infinitely easier. While she may not have a strong opinion on the science and property rights behind synths, she sees sapient humans when she interacts with them, and to her, that is enough to warrant their right to freedom. Comparatively, the ideologies of the Brotherhood of Steel and the Institute are far harsher. They may believe they're looking out for the greater good, but the stalker doesn't particularly like the fact that they achieve this by stepping on the heads of others. For that reason, the Minutemen also make a viable pick if you don't want to side with the Railroad. The Minutemen have bright ideas for the future, but they achieve them by putting in the work on the ground floor, making life better for those forced to exist in the post-war wasteland. At the beginning of the game, the Stalker's special stats will be 10 strength, 1 perception, 1 endurance, 1 charisma, 1 intelligence, 9 agility, and 5 luck. I know what you're thinking, there's an awful lot of 1s in her start game stats, but this build relies heavily on its strong suits, and her strength and agility are so good that they make up for just about every other area. There's very little the Stalker can't solve by sneaking and striking silently. The special book located in Sean's room under the crib should go into charisma, as it helps in getting the Lone Wanderer perk as soon as possible. Strength is the Stalker's best attribute, and rightly so. With a knife in her hand, the Stalker is deadlier than any adversary. You could have a full suit of Exo 1 power armor and a Gatling laser, but it won't do much good if you've had your throat slit before you can even pull the trigger. Similarly, agility goes hand in hand with strength, giving her the necessary stealth, AP, and the essential ability to pounce on her enemies, making up the distance on any foe before digging her claw into their neck. Finally, 5 points of luck, which by the end of the build will reach 9, will also be a massive help. As you can tell, the Stalker's forte is one quick strike from the shadows. She relies on rendering her foe useless before they know she's even there. If a horde of enemies become alerted to her presence and turn all of their guns on her at once, there's very little a knife's edge can do to save her skin. So, with luck, she'll almost always be able to count on devastating critical damage to guarantee a fatality when she draws blood. And with the Stalker's stats outlined, we can now get into which of the available perks are worth investing your points into. Usually we'd mention which of the perks are priorities for the build in question, but in the case of the Stalker, all of the perks we take will be essential to her effectiveness, so I'll give you a rundown of all of them. Whether it's showing her courage in front of attackers, hunting large wild animals, or fighting with her knife, there's no questioning the Stalker's strength. Anyone foolish enough to write her off will have no no more than a few moments to rue their mistake before they're bleeding out on the concrete. There are 2 perks to take from the strength stat line, and these are Big Leagues and Rooted. With all ranks of Big Leagues, you'll do double damage with melee weapons. On top of this, you'll hit all targets in front of you, and you'll have the chance to cripple, disarm, or even grand slam the head off the shoulders of your opponent. And then, with 2 ranks of Rooted, you'll have plus 50 damage resistance, and a 50% boost to melee weapon damage while you're standing still. Next up, we have Charisma, and while the Stalker may be a little bit too intimidating to most, her imposing presence helps her get her way. She's also strong-willed enough to fend for herself, not particularly relying on others for support. These characteristics of hers translate perfectly into her Charisma perks. You'll want to invest 1 perk point into the base stat itself, but other than that, go for 2 ranks of Black Widow and all ranks of Lone Wanderer. With Black Widow, men will take 10% more damage from the Stalker's attacks, and they'll be much easier to persuade in dialogue. With Lone Wanderer, you get a bunch of useful advantages, including 100 extra carry weight, 25% more damage on your attacks, 30% less incoming damage, and 25 more action points. All of these will be in effect as long as you're adventuring without a companion. The Stalker's agility perks are arguably the most important to her uniquely challenging yet rewarding playstyle. The Stalker can hunt without being spotted by the wild's most alert animals, and she can attack with a blade in hand quicker than most can fire a gun. With the following agility perks, the Stalker can put her high damage output to seriously good use. First, there's the Sneak perk, which fully optimized makes you 50% harder to detect when sneaking. Also, sneaking won't be adversely affected by running. You won't trigger mines and traps, and engaging stealth will cause distant enemies to lose track of you. That final effect is great in the event that you're ever caught sleuthing about. After that, Action Girl maxed out will provide a bonus of 75% to AP regeneration speed. Then, with Ninja, melee sneak attacks will do 10 times normal damage. You can see how it's becoming totally viable for the Stalker to one-hit KO most of her foes. Lastly, there's Blitz, and this is the perk for closing distances way quicker. With this perk, VAT's melee distance is increased massively. It even rewards you with more damage the farther you lunge with your attack. Lastly, we have Luck. And while many people would call this kind of thing luck, the Stalker prefers to see it as the outcome for her unrivaled skill and precision. If she hits an enemy's vital artery with her blade for an instant kill, it's hardly luck, but we won't go into semantics. With 5 points in the stat, plus the bobblehead, you'll need to put 3 perk points here to unlock all of the appropriate perks. With that, you can now take the following. First, take 3 ranks of Bloody Mess for a 15% bonus to all damage in combat, as well as much more visual gore. Then there's Idiot Savant. 2 ranks here will randomly give you 5 times experience from any action. Keep intelligence low to reap the most benefits here. After that, take all ranks of Better Criticals, Critical Banker, and 4-Leaf Clover. With this trio, critical strikes will be more plentiful. Better Criticals makes all of your crits do 2.5 times as much extra damage. Then, with Critical Banker, you can store up to 4 critical hits to be used in VATs whenever you want. And with 4-Leaf Clover, every hit in VATs has an excellent chance of filling your critical meter, regardless of how low the bar may have been before the hit. Finally, our last perk is Grim Reaper's Sprint, and this gives you a 35% chance to restore all action points when getting a kill in VATs. Considering how much the Stalker will rely on VATs and the fact that she simultaneously relies on getting instant one-hit kills, you could theoretically have more action points and more criticals on hand than you could ever use. As I said earlier, this build has a very specific playstyle, and if everything goes to plan and she can avoid taking hits from enemies, she'll be absolutely unstoppable. At the end of the game, the Stalker's special stats will be 11 strength, 2 perception, 2 endurance, 4 charisma, 1 intelligence, 10 agility, and 9 luck. The Stalker's aesthetic is one of the coolest available in Fallout 4, and you can get it from the Far Harbor DLC. This includes the Hunter's Pelt outfit and the Hunter's Hood. As for weapons, the Stalker wouldn't restrict herself to one. She has the option of a few deadly blades. There's Pickman's Blade, Krem's Tooth, and Throat Slicer. The first deals 15 base damage and 25 bleeding damage with a fast attack speed. It also has a hidden passive which causes 10 points of additional bleed damage for 5 seconds, also adding 0.6 to your sneak attack damage multiplier. The second does 28 base damage plus 3 poison damage with a medium attack speed, and the last does 86 damage plus 25 points of bleeding damage with a fast attack speed. The Stalker doesn't want companions spoiling her stealth or her Lone Wanderer perk effects, so she won't be using any companions whatsoever. As for settlements, she won't be building any, but if you happen to choose the Minutemen over the Railroad, you may want to help out with their settlement related quests. And there you have it guys, subscribe to FudgeMuppet if you haven't already, and give the video a like if you enjoyed it. This is our most challenging Fallout build, a real glass cannon character, and we hope you have as much fun with the Stalker as we did. Don't forget to head on down to the description where you can find links to our Twitter accounts, where you can follow us and interact with us directly. Thank you all so much for watching, I'm Drew, and I look forward to nerding out with you again in the next video.